Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here, for attending this roundtable discussion. We have the pleasure to have with us today Professor Vincent Nicholas Parrillo. So if you allow me, I will briefly introduce our renowned speaker, and then I will give him the floor for a 40-minute speech, and then you will have the time to ask your questions. So just briefly, a biography of the author. It's very brief because he has a list of achievements. I was so humbled when I was preparing for this event to see so many achievements. Thank you again for being with us today, Professor. So, Professor Vincent Nicholas Parrillo is a distinguished American sociologist and Professor Emeritus at William Paterson University, renowned for his extensive work on immigration, diversity, and intergroup relations. Born and raised in Paterson, New Jersey, he earned his first degree from Seton Hall University, his master's degree from Montclair State University, and his PhD in sociology from Rutgers University. Throughout his career, Professor Parrillo has authored several books, including widely used sociology textbooks such as Strangers to These Shores, Understanding Race and Ethnic Relations, and Diversity in America. His works have been translated into multiple languages, including Chinese, German, Japanese, Romanian, Korean, Italian, Turkish, Vietnamese, and Polish, among others. Professor Parrillo has lectured at over 100 universities across Asia, Europe, and North America. He has also served as a consultant for the U.S. State Department and Department of Defense, providing expertise on immigration and intergroup dynamics, and conducting diversity training sessions for senior Army officers. Beyond academia, Professor Parrillo has produced and narrated several award-winning documentaries, including Ellis Island, Getaway to America, and Paterson and Its People. He is the author of 2 historical novels, Guardians of the Gate and Defenders of Freedom, which explore the immigrant experience at Ellis Island. He has also directed theater productions, including the rock opera Hamlet and several musicals. His extensive career reflects a commitment to fostering understanding and dialogue across cultural and ethnic divides through education, research, and media. I am pleased to welcome Professor Vincent Parrillo to discuss his book, Hearts and Minds, Hizmet Schools and Interethnic Relations, that explores the role of Hizmet schools in promoting interethnic harmony across diverse societies. Please welcome Professor Parrillo with a big round of applause. Professor, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for being here, and hello to who's ever watching me out there. I think I'd like to begin with giving you just a little bit of the backstory as to how I came about writing this book that I'm here to speak to you about. I've spent almost all of my professional career dealing with the topic of diversity and the acceptance of one another, of intergroup understanding. I heard about the Hizmet schools, and it intrigued me. But that's all I could do at that moment because I was busy with this particular book, Diversity in America. And when I finished this, I would turn my attention to that. But I'm deliberately mentioning and holding this book up right now because certain things are happening in the United States right now, which I do not approve, in which there is a subjugation, if you will, of anyone who speaks about diversity or whatever. And this book has now been banned by certain states that are very conservative, like Texas and Florida. And it was once a popular book at the military academies because I used to give diversity leadership training programs to members of the armed forces. So it's now been banned from the military academies as well. It's not a political book. It's a social historical look at our nation, including the American Indians. So I'm going to just keep promoting the book wherever I can, even though some people, maybe Europeans, will be more likely to it than the people in certain states of our United States. As a sociologist, taking what I call the social historical method, what I look for are patterns. How do things be seen today, which might be a little bit unique, be seen in the context? And so in looking for patterns and looking at the past, I'm not a journalist. I'm not reporting events as they are. I'm not a historian telling about how things once were. I'm an analyst, and I look for how can we learn our behavior, our situations in the larger scheme of things. It's the old American, maybe saying here as well, about seeing the forest for the trees. You can't see the big picture. You're so overwhelmed with the little picture. So I heard about these schools. They intrigued me because in those days, the word Hizmet was not being used. Mr. Gulen's name was not being bandied about either. These were simply known as the Turkish schools at the time. And I began my research. My intellectual curiosity was prompted by certain things. I discovered that the schools had, each website, they identified themselves as having a dual mission. One was a quality education. Particularly in the STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. But they always talked about the double mission, and the second was about character building, dealing with ethical values, universal ethical values. And so I continued my research. I promise you I'm not going to read from the book, because perhaps I put you all to sleep, and I certainly don't want to do that. But there's two passages that jumped out at me as I was conducting my research. What I started to read was anybody who had written anything about these schools. Some of them were negative. Some of them were very positive. Some were what we call insider studies by people who were part of these schools. Others were outsider studies by people who knew nothing of it but went there. These two passages particularly moved me at the time, and this is what really prompted me to want to write this book. The first is, I'll just read it to you. It's one of the previous critics saying, quoting Mr. Gulen, "Education is different from teaching. Most people can teach, but only a few can educate." In other words, teaching is the transmission of knowledge, but educating a student includes, according to Gulen, altruistic love and moral guidance. Teachers therefore play a key role in shaping a student's character by teaching them. And then the other passage, just very quickly, is quoting directly from the man. "The real teacher is the one who sows the seed and preserves it. It is his duty to be occupied with what is good and wholesome, and to lead and guide the child in his or her life. And teachers, therefore, will play a key role in shaping the character by teaching them true principles that will be found throughout all levels of the educational system, primary, secondary, and university. That's the only way you can achieve intellectually enlightened people with strong values and a sense of altruism." It sounded so wonderful and so idealistic, and I wondered how real it was, how true was it. And all of these schools dedicated themselves to that universal set of principles and goals. And I wondered, one, how effective they were in achieving their goals, because part of my background, in addition to my study of diversity, is I have been an educational consultant. I have been on accreditation teams looking at other schools and how well they perform their goals. I have been on teams to create curricula at certain universities in the area of American Studies, plus being a teacher myself, both at the high school level before I became a college professor. So I felt I had enough going for me to be able to be a little bit more intelligent about what I was trying to do. So there was that. But there's also this interest about how would these schools perform their stated goals in different cultural settings. How much? Because we all know that external factors impact upon the schools. And so I embarked upon this mission by wanting to go to multiple places. I wanted to be in both Western and non-Western settings. I wanted to be in populations that were more culturally homogeneous and ones that were more heterogeneous in their being. So I embarked first in Muslim majority countries, such as in Albania and Kazakhstan, where all other faiths would be in the minority in attendance in the school, because most schools reflect the population in which they are situated. I wanted to go into Muslim minority countries, where, again, the reverse would occur in places such as Romania and in Poland. But also wanted to look at countries that were more secular, that were immigrant-receiving nations as well. And in this instance, I chose Canada and my own country, the United States, in order to see what were the different external factors affecting the internal ones. Because what you have now is not only different outside cultural influences, but inside various interethnic, intercultural interactions among the students. So that was the way to do it, I thought, and I did. The other important point that it needs to be understood before I talk about whatever it is I found is that my approach is what we call the scientific method. And I was not just sitting down talking to people and getting answers. That would not necessarily give me anything that was of validity and reliability. My research went through my university's institutional review board, so they would see the kinds of questions I was going to be asking, the structure in which I was doing them, the protection for my respondents in which I was affording. So my research became, therefore, university approved, university sanctioned as I went forward. As I worked through various facilitators with a colleague of mine from my university, Mahmoud Ansari, who was working with me on the interviewing, what I did was I secured the permission of administrators, some of them reluctant for me to do it, so I assured them I was not evaluating them or their school, that these were all aggregate findings, that everything would be anonymous. And that was the way it would be. Secondly, when I interviewed people, the interview was conducted in a private room. There was no one else could hear. I assured them of what I had. I even had a little chart in front of me of what the structure was to protect them so that their names would never be used. I wasn't going to report any students' information back to anybody at the school, and that they were completely in a safe environment to give me their answers, and believe me, they did. Also, I wanted not only to have this multiple input from many different sources out of the countries, I wanted it from within the schools. So I conducted hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of interviews over a 4-year period. I interviewed the administrators to see it from their perspective. I interviewed many teachers to get it from their perspective as well. I interviewed parents. I interviewed the students. And in many of these cases, I tracked down, with the help, of course, many of the businessmen who were donors to these schools to get it from their perspective. So there's all these different perspectives coming into play to help me get an understanding of what was going on. And that was the approach I used. So everything that came forward now came in those directions. And as I said, it was over a 4-year period. I originally planned, when I was about to write and publish the book, to do all that and include specific names where I was given permission to do so, which was mostly from the school administrators and some of the teachers, never the students. But the coup occurred in Turkey, and the persecution began, including people I had met were imprisoned. I waited in the hope that this would pass. It did not, it has not. And I said, I've got to get this book out there. There are 2 reasons I want to write this book, which I'll mention in just a moment. I want this book out there. So I checked with some people, with the Turkish Cultural Institute and the Peace Islands Institute and my home locale, to get with them approval of an approach I could and should take, which simply was don't use the names to protect everybody. My editor insisted that his name be used. He says, I don't care, I want them to know who I am. But I did not use the names, so there's that. Now, why did I want to write this book? Because I thought that the findings I had were so profound, I wanted people to know. These schools were under attack for having a political and a religious agenda. In fact, I looked for that. I knew that when I went out there. This was before the coup now. I'm out there starting in 2012. I knew the criticisms. So I had ways of asking questions in a subtle way, primarily from the students, to see if any kind of religious slippings were going in there, or any political, as was being accused of the schools. There were not. That was not occurring. There were a few wrinkles I'll speak to in a moment. I wanted people to know and understand what these schools were, not just what they said they were, but what I found them to actually be. So the first purpose of this book was to inform and to serve as a countermeasure for the criticism that was being made. But there's another reason. Many of you listening to me either had been to a Hizmet school, know about the Hizmet schools, or are part of them now. And if that applies to whoever is in this room or listening to me, then this book was written for you. In this book are the voices of many people, of the parents, and of the students. We teachers have certain goals. One of them obviously is conveying whatever knowledge and subject matter we are trying to convey. But we hope we're doing more. We hope, especially from the younger people, we are helping them become better people, that we are helping them become better citizens. And if you are an educator of any kind, the only way you know if you're doing a good job or not is when somebody tells you. A student you've had comes back and thanks you when they have no reason to do so, but they do. For every educator, that happens, and that's one of the intrinsic values. It's one of the rewards. It's one of the satisfactions. It's the fulfillment that you get as an educator. This book is the same. If you are connected with the Hizmet schools, this book is the voices of people like yours speaking. That's what it is. If you attended a Hizmet school, I've had people come up to tell me how it brought back memories of those years and times. That was the reason I wrote the book, too. So the book is for them out there who know nothing. The book is for you who also know something. All right. What did I find? I found many things. I am guided as a sociologist by theoretical orientations, and my theoretical perspective here is something we call negotiated order theory, and that deals with structure and processes. I won't bore you on, don't worry, I'm not going to get deep into theory here. But what it is it looks at what is the institution, how is it structured, what are the processes within it, within that framework, and what meaning comes out of it to the people within it. What is the kind of culture within the school and what is drawn from it? And that kind of perspective allows us to find what's going on. Okay. In terms of the structure and process, each and every one of the schools I went, oh, and by the way, I went to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, colleges, and graduate schools. I interviewed both people of all ages from 8 through postdoctorate. I went to schools that were all girls schools and all boys schools and co-educational schools. I went to schools that were primarily commuter schools, others that were primarily residential, or combinations. So I tried to cover everything in every which way to see if any of the variables intervening with what we were trying to find would in some way affect what was going on, besides the cross-cultural study that I was doing to see what was happening there. The simplest thing to tell you is that all of the schools, some of them in older buildings, some of them not, but all of them had state-of-the-art classrooms, smart boards, whiteboards, various kinds of innovative technology was being used. The subjects were comparable. There's a certain basic core curriculum that one can find in all of the schools, but they also cater within the particular culture. Most of the courses were taught in English. However, certain courses within the culture of the country, a history class, for example, or grammar, various cultural ones, in addition to Turkish classes being taught there as electives, which were popular, by the way. That was all part of the curriculum. The curriculums were very, very common. And as I mentioned before, the websites also indicated a comparable goal that they had in mind. Where the most revealing information came from were from the parents and the students. I will speak to the teachers in a moment, but I want to stay first because usually students are the most important focus in education, so I want to start with them, if I may. I was particularly impressed with the young girls and women who, it didn't matter which country I was in, but would talk about such things, and I'm actually now paraphrasing some of the actual things that they said that you'll find in the book. One young girl said, I was very shy. I kept to myself. I usually just went along to get along. I just, whatever people wanted, I would do. But now I have self-confidence. The school taught me this. I now can be more independent. I know I can be what I want to be. And I like myself more. Another student said something similar to me in another country about, I was scared. I just didn't want to speak out. I'm not that way now. Now I feel comfortable in speaking in class. They taught me how to feel better for myself. There was a boy who was a Christian boy, who was in a Muslim majority country, and he was small of frame. He was someone who looked easy to pick on, and they did pick on him. And he was bullied. He was bullied badly by two Muslim boys. And he talked about this and how now, as a junior, those two boys are his best friends. They get along so well. And there's a little inkling there. Okay, what happened? What went on there? Well, I talked to some parents about those kinds of things. And I said, do you notice any changes other than the kid growing up, do you notice any changes? And a number of the parents spoke about the girls. I can't believe she's found herself, said one mother. A father, this is one of my favorite stories. This man was a sponsor. He was a father of a 15-year-old girl. He was a TV cameraman, so he was not one of our high-powered businessmen as some of the others I was meeting in penthouse apartments and so forth. This man was a TV cameraman in Bosnia. And he talked about, he said, I was a very bitter man. We lived next door to each other. We didn't care about each other's religion or whatever. But then that horrible period came. We're talking about the 90s, the ethnic cleansing time. And he said, I had friends of mine killed. Nobody trusted anybody anymore. We hated each other. And I became very bitter. I, in no way, talked about those years with my child. She knew I was a bitter man. But she started coming home from her school, and she started saying things. And she started telling me about some of her friends who were not of our religion. And the more I heard, the more it softened my heart. And she started to bring back my old thoughts, my old feelings. And by now, the tears are coming down the man's eyes. And I thought, he said, any school that could teach her that, to feel that way, and make me feel that way, I will support that school. I had many a child talk about, I have friends now I never thought I'd ever have of those other faiths. I had parents say to me, I can't believe how open-minded my child has become. I had one boy say to me, I was just living my life. I do what I wanted to do. I just lived it. I didn't think about anything. I just wanted to have a good time. I was just living. I still do that, he says. But now I think about other people too. I suddenly realized they have the feelings I have. And I don't think about myself all the time now. And that's just kind of like a down-to-earth basic thing going on, you know. But something is happening. What is happening? The teachers that I interviewed were dedicated. Lots of teachers are dedicated. Many teachers are dedicated with a focus on what the individual differences of mental, kids with different abilities, teaching my lesson plan, getting my subject across, evaluating them, getting them grades. And they're committed to that, but oftentimes just that. The teachers in the schools saw themselves with a larger purpose. saw themselves as promoting those ethical values that I talked about at the very beginning here, these universal ethical values. They grow out of Islam, but it's not Islam that's being taught. It's the universal ethical values one finds in all religions, quite frankly, but are growing out of Mr. Gulen's teachings in inspiring the people that way. And so you see, that. What we saw in so many instances was teachers explaining to me, I don't teach values. I'm not a lecturer of behavior. We lead by example. If we can show what it is to be a good person, we hope we will be their model. We don't teach it per se. However, in not all of the schools, certainly not in Canada and the United States, certainly not, but most certainly, and by the way, I never did any of the schools in Turkey per se, so this is outside my purview of the schools in Turkey. But in places like Albania and Kazakhstan in particular, but other places too, the Turkish beautiful custom, one of my favorite things about Turkish culture, tea time. Tea time, and I love the Turkish tea. But the schools had after hours tea time after the classes were done. And the teachers would have a small informal group sharing tea. There's no structure. There's no formal things you say. This is an informal time, okay? It's informal time, but certain topics will be taught. Many students said to me, this was their favorite time of day. They could learn from each other. They could feel comfortable in asking questions of their teacher that they would not ask their parents. The teachers might talk about things, what does it mean to you to be a good person? What is a good person? And anything related in that particular field. We discovered, no matter where we went, no matter what school, no matter what grade level, no matter which country, the bond between the students and the teachers was profound, profound. He's more than my teacher. He's like my big brother. She's more than my teacher. She's more like my sister, my big sister. I heard the terms brother and sister used over and over again, independently of one another in these different areas. It's totally different in Canada and the United States. The schools there, the bond is strong, but it's different. In these secular immigrant societies, it is very typical for an immigrant family, an ethnic family, to want to hold on to their roots. Cultural maintenance, they want to hold on to it. And so there's much more emphasis on preserving the culture and the parents' belief strongly that anything else should be done at the home, not there. And so tea times are not a factor in most of the schools we were at in the Western Hemisphere kind of thing. So a difference there. A tremendous bond exists tripartite with family as well. So it's the parent, the student, the school. It's a three-way thing. In many of these countries, the teachers made a point to visit the home of a student at least once a year. And if it was a considerable distance away, like 2 or 3 hours away, they would come with their family to that house and visit to establish. And part of it was to scope out, if you will, the house, to see what were the socioeconomic conditions in which the family lived in terms of if there was greater need there for scholarship to maintain as a reward for it. So there was that as well. We found the schools, of course, were somewhat elite in several ways. The schools were elite because you take an entrance exam to get into it. But these are highly competitive. And you might get as many as 800, 1,000 people applying for 50 slots. And although the school administrators go to all parts of the country to make sure they can draw from all over, the reality is it's going to be the most gifted and talented are going to pass those exams in order to get in. And it's high competition. I had school administrators talk to me about the pressure they get from politicians and from diplomats, if you will, to get their kids into the school. And that's a slippery slope. They know it. Once you agree to it, you can't stop. So they do the arbitrary thing of the cutoff. So it is elite a little in that way. There is a tuition that is paid. So there's a cost factor involved. Some families can afford the tuition, some cannot. That's where the scholarships come in. That's where these various foundations that help support the schools provide some of the money in order for that to happen. And the scholarships are based as rewards, if you will, for good performance. So there's a way of trying to keep all social economic factors at work, but the reality is it's more of a middle class and upper middle class clientele there, although there are some from the lower income and working class. To be sure, we met working class parents and so forth. But there is that dimension to it. But I think the most important thing that's going on here is how successful are these schools? And I've written about this, and as I said, there's lots of voices in here, and there's lots of commentary in it. The book is written for the general public, by the way, so it's not like some boring, put you to sleep scholarly book. I tried not to make it that. The schools are absolutely successful in the mission they are attempting to achieve. They are. Okay? No one school anywhere is perfect. No school is. And the same is true of these schools. You and I have probably, every one of us, had teachers that were terrible. I can't believe anyone in this room, every single teacher was the most perfect. In fact, if you want to test your memory banks to prove it, if you could think back now to 3 teachers you had in elementary school, you know, if you did a little mental exercise for now, which 3 come to your mind? Or the same is true in the secondary school. Which 3 teachers come to mind? Now, maybe you had a favorite subject and that was it. But I'm going to suggest to you that it wasn't, this was the class because I really was thrilling to discover potassium. I couldn't believe the joy I had in solving my first quadratic equation. I think it was something else. I mean, the subjects may have appealed to you, but it was human beings. It was persons. Each teacher has a personality. Some of us are better than others. Some of us are better speakers than others. And there is that. We did find some wrinkles in the schools, but the parents in some of the schools, like Romania and in Albania, talk about the public schools being terrible. And teachers not even knowing your name or caring. Or in some instances, if your parents pay them, they'll give you a good rate. They would talk about the existence of gangs. They talked about the existence of bullying and how this was an unsafe school, but here my child is safe. Here it is fine. And I mentioned the boy before, a victim of bullying. I mean, kids are kids. Teenagers are teenagers. They can be rambunctious. They can be a little self-centered. Part of being a teenager, I think, is to be a self-centered person for a while at least. But the schools have something going on. And it's not magic. It's a pervasive culture that is developed and inculcated, if you will, within the students. It could be simple little things. I had an elementary grade teacher tell me there was a boy in the class that was stealing pencils from the classmates, and she caught the kid stealing the pencils. She said, I did not berate him. I did not, in front of everyone, become accusatory. I spoke to him privately after class, and I talked about what is right and what is wrong. In the next class we had, I gave him the job of distributing the pencils to everybody, just so he could see them going out, actually doing it himself, doing the sharing. And it's just little nuggets of things, little ways in which it happens. But what's more important is how are those little things happening? It's because the mindset of the teachers is focused on the whole person, not just the intellect, not just the acquisition of knowledge, but going beyond it without being preachy, without saying, this is what you should do. Never that. And when you have an inclusive environment, including kids that are just there for the few hours of the day before they're back home and home the entire weekends, and the school has only a certain point in time to influence you and to affect you, it's what happens in that environment that can extend beyond it. When I talk to the older students, I know when I became a teacher and I decided, there was one teacher in particular that I admired in my field. At the time, I was a high school English teacher, and I emulated him. I think we all do that. I think we all have role models. There's always somebody that somehow inspired us. And with the postgraduate students that I was talking about in all these many different countries, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, it was sort of like in the United States, you know, we have what we, in baseball, in professional baseball, we have AAA and AA teams. This is called the farm system, where you groom people, and eventually they make the big time, and they eventually get there. And I think the schools do that, because a number of these postgraduate students say to me, I want to give back. I want others to have what I have had, and I want to do that. And while that's true, I met many teachers that had never gone to a Hizmet school. These schools were established a while, and they were native residents there who became teachers and were recruited and came into the system. But they become part of the culture. I mean, part of us, whether you go to work for a business corporation or you go to work in an educational system, what you do is you acclimate yourself to what is there in the organization. If you want to succeed in the organization, you become part of it. That doesn't mean you have to have the same faith, but it does mean you have to have the same goals. It does mean you have to be part of a team. And that's what the teachers do. They consult with each other, they talk to each other about how these students are doing or whatever, so that you get a better understanding of the whole person. You stay around after school, you help out in extracurricular activities, whether it's you're sponsoring field trips or help for earthquake victims or whatever it is you're doing. There's ways in which you reach out, you teach by doing, learning by doing. And that's where the success of these schools come in. Yes, they're good, but a building is just a building. A laboratory is just a laboratory. It's how it works inside. It's the people inside that can make it work or not work. I found a few clinkers along the way in a couple of these schools with a couple of these teachers that really didn't belong there. Not my job to report them. I promised everybody it would be anonymous. But for the most part, what you find is these schools are based on certain basic goals and aims of promoting integrity, character, good moral behavior, to be a good person, and to be a well-educated person. They have Olympiads, and they compete in many subject areas. These kids are graduating, going on to the best schools. They're getting the best education possible, but they're getting the best complete education, a total education. And I wish so many of the schools in the United States were as complete in their goals and in their achievements as these schools are. But some are, most aren't. They're good quality schools. I'm not putting down the schools. I'm just talking about what I found in the completeness of this. I went in objectively. I am still objective, but I have been sold. The evidence was too consistent, too overwhelming, too much all the same positive things coming from many sources that told you about them in the beginning, from all these different perspectives. And if you ever have a chance to see the book, you'll see in there the voices of many echoing kind of what I am saying. And the voices in there, and there are hundreds, are representative of the others that are not in there. So that's, I think my time is up on that. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this inspiring presentation. We have now, I think, around 40 minutes for questions. Feel free to just let us know if you want to ask a question, and we'll pass on the mic.
Yes, anybody want to ask some questions of me?
Maybe I can ask a question.
Yes. It's mostly for...
We're getting a question. The camera's here, so we'll get a question coming off the side here.
Thank you very much for this very impressive information about schools. Actually, what did you observe about the teachers? Because I know that some teachers are newly graduated teachers from their universities and took part in the Glen schools. So how these newly graduated teachers can be so much professional like this?
The question about how they can be more so professional, I feel, well, first of all, teaching itself is a profession. Secondly, you study, you may learn pedagogy, you may learn various teaching techniques in school, you may get a better background in order to teach. But a good teacher is a good communicator. You need to convey. And I think these people, regardless of where they graduate, I think it's regardless of where they graduated, whether they're coming from a Hizmet university or a public university, have been trained, but to be a good teacher and how to be a good teacher, and your own innate ability to communicate determines how good a teacher you will be. But again, what I said at the beginning is, Mr. Gulan says anyone can be a teacher, but we're talking about who can educate. And I think that's a skill set you either have or you don't have. But if you are teaching within an environment that promotes certain values, and it gets known, you know, what if you're not or whatever, I suppose you're held accountable. All of us are. We get evaluated as teachers, and you know, we talk about in my country getting tenure and so on. But I think it's partly the training, and I think it's partly the culture. So I guess the best answer I give you on that.
The greatest strength about the Gulen schools.
I'm sorry?
The greatest strength, what you see about the Gulen schools.
What is the greatest thing I see? I think, well, you ask me to pick one thing. I think what I liked, what impressed me the most, I guess I'm going to answer it that way. The thing that impressed me the most was that bond between the teacher and the student. I always tried to be friendly with my students, but I was never as good as the folks I saw in terms of the tightness of it, the selfless giving of time to others, staying after school, not rushing out. Now, some of these people I had were married women. They had their children. They had home responsibilities. I mean, there are obligations we all have outside of a school or a work setting. But somehow they find the way, and they make the time for it. But the point of it is, more than anything else, they know each other personally. And I don't mean that just by name. It isn't just I know your name. I know who you are. And that's an important point, I think. And what's more important than that even is that the student feels, I know what you are. Teacher knows who you are, but the student knows, I know what you are. You are my big brother. You are my big sister. I can trust you. I can ask you things. I know you have my best interest at heart. That's what they're feeling. That's what's coming across to me from the students every time I was speaking to them. And I think that's what impressed me more than anything else, that bond. Someone in the back.
I have two questions actually. My first question is, how did you decide to make a research about the Hizmet schools, and how did you, how did you decide to make a research about Hizmet schools, and you are expert in the diversity. That's why most probably you have some pre-assumptions before your research. How these are evolve in the process of your research, your pre-assumptions, how they are evolved.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm so slow picking up what you're saying. Can you help me?
I think the idea was kind of how did you start to work on this, and then you had some preconception about this before starting your.
I'm sorry.
How did this evolve?
Yeah.
Okay, so back in the beginning, I was speaking about, I had heard about these schools when I was working on the one book, and because I had done evaluation and accreditation visits, including for the American Council of Education, at other schools, and so I had some familiarity with what kinds of things to look for. And the fact that I had already been on a number of overseas assignments for the State Department as a speaker, and I had been a visiting professor at a couple of universities in Europe. So I had different bits and pieces of things all there. And it just seemed like this would be a wonderful thing to add to my knowledge. So it was my intellectual curiosity. As I said, I didn't explain it more fully before, but it wasn't until a couple of years into the study that people in the movement felt freer about using the word Hizmet publicly, and identifying more their attachment. And this was still before the coup, but so I didn't know any of that. And certainly none of the parents did. None of the parents ever knew it at any point. Only when I got to the postgraduate students did they start knowing Mr. Gulen or knowing about the philosophy or his call for a golden generation. Only then would they know these things. But for me, it was just hearing about something, and the more I researched it myself, just looking at what was there, the more it intrigued me. It was sort of like following breadcrumbs, if you will. I was following intellectual breadcrumbs, and I saw how some people were praising these schools and others were condemning them. And I wondered, how could it be both? It can't be both. It's either one or the other, or maybe there's a mixture of truth. And so part of me wanted to find out, if I could, what was going on. But more importantly than was there a hidden agenda, which I said earlier there is not, I wanted to see how did these schools work in building the two dimensions, because most schools I know, I mean, you might talk about certain things or do a little tisk-tisk, if you will, as a teacher about, oh, no, you shouldn't do that, but that's about it. And I wanted to see how is this so much more complete, and how, if one, was it successful? And two, as I said earlier, how did it function in different ways? So the answer, I guess, the best answer to your question is, the more I learned, the more I wanted to know. And the more I wanted to know, the more I had to find out. And how do I find out? Go there. And again, I didn't want to be biased. I was objective. I didn't have any expectations. I just what was it I would find. And I was happy to find whatever I found, but I was going to find it. A true social scientist tries not to inject your own opinion into things. You try to be objective as best you can and find out what you did. And that's kind of the way I went at it.
Yeah, and my second question is about, you said you observe a pattern about like a kind of a women empowerment in like a female students. Actually, I wonder, do you think which dynamics make this condition possible? Which dynamics are observed for them?
Yeah, that's the hard question and the hardest one to answer on this dynamic. I try to give a couple of examples here. All I know is that some of it's practical. They deliberately pair up students in a laboratory or on a group project that are different from one another. Instead of having your friend or somebody you normally work with, you work with somebody else. And sometimes it's just, they would go around the room and say, let's say there were 4 groups: 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All the 4s go over here. All the 3s go over here. Do it that way, so that it doesn't look like you're deliberately picking. But their point was to put people who are normally not together. And that was one small tactical way. But most of the ways in which it happened was not that way. Most of the ways in which it happened was very indirect, very subtle. And it was usually in interactions primarily outside the classroom, not in the classroom. The only way I could penetrate what that dynamic is in the results. I mentioned the boy who was bullied by, Christian and Muslim bullying there, and how that ended in friendship. How so many times the students would tell me, I have friends now that I never had before who were, this faith or that faith or whatever, because there's an old sociological slang, and it is this: like likes to be with like. We are more comfortable with people like ourselves than we are with people not like ourselves, and that's normal. That's not prejudice. Whoa. Italian with the hands. That's not prejudice. That's just a natural inclination. We have to learn prejudice, but we can also learn acceptance. We can learn intergroup harmony. And I think it is by providing the means for intergroup harmony within the schools is how it happens. So it's something like, it's a dynamic that takes on its own life. And you just kind of arrange the pieces a little bit, but you're also doing it primarily by example and by, as I said, the times with the informal conversations. And as the parents were finding it happening, the students were finding it happening. And that's kind of how I know the dynamic is there, although I can't give you a recipe exactly.
Hello, thank you very much for your presentation. So my question is, as you said that you started this work in 2012, and it's going on until I don't know when, but you mentioned also the coup of 2016. So have you been able to examine this evaluation of the schools throughout this process in the movement, because it has a huge impact, the coup? And how do you think that the shutdowns of this school in several places on Earth has an impact, or will it be changed in the future? How would it be changed?
I'll answer your question, but I'm going to put a related question in there, and that is, there's a whole field in sociology known as social movements, and how do social movements succeed or fail? The Gulen movement, by the people who are inspired by the Imam's teachings and carry on through their own actions. All right. How long does that dynamic last? When you lose the leader of a movement, how long does the movement continue? All right. Partly expecting that was Mr. Gulen talking about a golden generation, of a younger generation, learning, being inspired, and wanting to go forth, okay? So I mentioned at the tail end of my book about that, about the movement's future, all right? And the movement's future is unknown as anyone's, all right? But we do know that there's certain things that cross the generations and transcend the deliberate. The deliberate picture on the book is of a balloon shaped like a heart, but it's floating in the air, transcending borders. That's the symbolism here. And the thing of it is, the ideas, the universal ethical values. I mean, who really can object to what the goals are about integrity and harmony and acceptance? And so as long as those ideas prevail, schools shut or not, as long as the ideas prevail, the movement will continue. I came to you from Amsterdam, and yesterday, as part of my little touristy thing there, I went into an old house, a canal house from the 16th century. And on the 5th floor, there is a church hidden there. It occupies the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors in one big chapel that can seat 200 people. It was because Catholics were forbidden to worship openly by the Protestant rulers of the 16th century. But the Catholicism prevailed, as did Judaism and all the other religions. But the Catholicism prevailed there and then for 200 years more in that hidden church. The schools are shuttered in Turkey. Schools that I went to in Romania, I know for a fact, have been shut down. Others as well. The octopus has reached out to certain sympathetic governments, and schools have been shut. Whereas once I might talk about 1,400 schools worldwide, I now talk about 1,000. So hundreds have been shuttered, and it is to the loss of those people. It is clearly to the loss, because bright young people are denied the opportunity for a really good quality education, number one. There's education of the whole person and becoming so much more than you could have been as a whole person is not there. But there are still those 1,000 other schools. There's 1,000 points of light in other parts of the world. And I suspect even where they've been shuttered, the spirit is there. It lives on. It may not be as open, but the people who are living their lives under the influence of the values they have been taught are still doing what they are doing. And one can only hope a person can only live so long. Tyranny can only last so long. Democracy will prevail. Those schools will be back as long as there are the younger generation willing to carry the torch, willing to move on and say, this is what is good, this is what is right, and do it.
Someone else would like to ask a question? Oh, okay.
So one of the online participants asks, Dear Professor, did your investigation also include Hizmet schools in Western Europe, Belgium, France, Germany? As I can imagine, the results may vary on the context. For example, US educational system is very different from the one in Europe.
Well, there are so many places I didn't go. I've had people wonder why I didn't go to Indonesia to see the schools there when I was in California. No, I am aware of the multiple schools here in Belgium and also in France and so forth. At the time, I had no grant. I had no big money to do all these things. It was over 4 years because I had my own work to do. I had already used up my sabbatical at another time, so I wasn't a sabbatical. So what I did was at the end of my school year in early May, I had the opportunity then to go to several places over the next few years. And so when I decided what I wanted to do, again, to return to my early remarks, I wanted Muslim majority countries, which obviously rules out Western Europe. I wanted Muslim minority, yes, and I could go many places for a Muslim minority. But what I wanted here was where another faith dominated, And so clearly we have Catholicism or Christian Orthodox dominating in Romania and Poland, and those seem to be so dominant there that it would be a striking cultural contrast to the other. Belgium is a very diverse country when you think about it, besides its being three parts, and I'm well aware of Flemish and Dutch and French and all that. And of course, France can be very diverse too. It just seemed to me that the countries I picked were giving me strong enough contrast to do the kind of study I wanted to do. But yes, there are countries such as the Western European ones that I could have done, but that's the reason I chose not to. No reflection on the countries. It was just the kind of ways I wanted to contribute.
Is the altruism that you see?
Please use the mic.
The altruism that you see at the schools.
The altruism, yes. The altruism clearly is there. I mean, you see it. I mean, it's in different ways. And we can define altruism in many ways, but I mean, if it's the giving of oneself for another in some fashion, I mean, all of these schools have various kinds of well, they have cultural trips. I mean, the schools in Canada are going down to Haiti, extremely poor country, for example, in a wholly different culture and so forth. When there's a tragedy, such as the earthquake victims or whatever, doing things for others in that fashion. It can be on a grander gesture. It can also be on a more personal level. Certainly the teachers display altruism every day of their lives there. I mean, what they are doing in terms of extending themselves beyond their subject matter. All right. Now, there are many teachers in many schools that might be advisor to a club, give a little extra time for this club or whatever activity, or for sports and be a coach. There are different ways one can be more than a teacher, but it's usually focused on an activity or whatever. Whereas as I have found, what I found in the teachers was, again, as I said, there are always exceptions to the rule, but that still proves the rule, you see. But for the most part, what the teachers are is giving of their time freely for their students beyond the classroom. And I think that's altruism on a personal level, before we talk about the altruism of intergroup harmony and accepting one another, not just accepting one another. The word tolerance kind of bothers me in a way, because tolerance means acceptance, but it means I tolerate you, and it goes beyond I tolerate you. It's that I welcome you, all right? Because what we discover if we are open-minded is that your language, my language, your skin color, my religion, yours, are just variable adjectives of our common humanity. That's all it is. It's a shade of our humanity. But down at the bottom, it's humanity. And that's the understanding that I think true altruism is you understanding that, and yes, think of yourself sometimes, but also, as that one boy told me, that's all I used to do. Now I think about other people too. And not just think about them, but actually welcome. And I'll just stop with this. I don't know if you like ice cream or not, but I do. My all-time favorite is vanilla, followed by rum raisin. But there are all these other flavors. If I had vanilla ice cream all the time, it would no longer be as much fun as it is that first time. It would no longer be as much fun. I don't know how you are in your lives that you live in your free time, but perhaps it is let's do something different this weekend. Or let's go someplace different on our vacation. We talk about variety is the spice of life. We don't want the same old, same old. We should do that more with people. How much we enrich ourselves when we interact with people not like us. We have so much to learn from each other and joy with each other.
Thank you. May I ask how the boy that was bullied become friends. So how the boy that was bullied become friends with the two guys that did you happen to?
Oh, I asked, yes. I'm being asked about that boy who was bullied. Actually, more than bullied, he was beat up physically. How did he become such friends? And it was not, I better be friends with him or I'll get beat up again. It was not that at all. It was just being made by the teachers. The teachers became aware of it. And what do? You say, don't do that anymore? Well, you could do that, and you might say, detention for you if you do that again. But that doesn't change how they felt. So you have to change how they feel. And I don't know the complete answer to how it happened. But I do know that that was one of the examples I gave earlier about having the teacher have them work together in a lab. So they had to become partners and work together and get to know each other. Because what's interesting is sometimes when you have to share a workload or responsibility, you somehow start getting to know each other more. You might even make a comment or two. It might be something, or discover, oh, you like him too, or you like that team too, or something, just little ways in which the commonalities are found. And that's what they did. Now, I'm sure there was much more to it. That part I don't know the answer to. But I never knew, because we were doing the anonymous canvassing here, whether I interviewed any of those Muslim boys. I don't know that, whether I did or didn't, because I won't bore you with the methodology, but there's a way of doing both what you call structured interviews with random sampling. And the random sampling just means I pick you, I pick you. It means we deliberately pick people from both genders, we pick from different age levels, we pick them from different majors and whatever, and then we pick every third one or whatever, and that's how that was. So I don't know if I had them or I didn't, but I do know I had the boy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We still have some time. Yes, if you can just
Send the mic.
pass the mic. Thank you.
Professor, thank you very much for your presentation. Well, you said that you objectively said that there are consistent indicators that these schools are successful. And we talked about the altruism the teachers show so far. Well, apart from these altruistic, behaviors coming from the teachers, are there any other, concrete concepts, educational concepts that Gülen schools, Hizmet schools contributed to the, education sector? Are there any, concrete concepts that can be transferable or followed by other schools?
Yes. Is there anything in the educational model of the schools that can be followed elsewhere? I have a little of that in the book. Not a lot, but I do have a little of that answer in the book. But let me say this. One, again, I have to go back to structure and process where I started in the beginning. The educational model has a set structure which is not all that different from any school, quite frankly. It always has to meet the national accreditation standards, so there's certain guidelines you must have in the first place. And then you can put wrinkles, if I call them that, into your curriculum, such as teaching Turkish culture and language in Kazakhstan, or you can put little wrinkles in about Turkey. You can also, but the structure is kind of universal, I think. So it takes us to the secondary mission of the school, the model, which is, as I said before, building the complete citizen. The complete whole person, the whole underpinning, if you will, of Mr. Gülen's philosophy of education is that. And so are there concrete examples there? And an expression we use in America in our schools of pedagogy is the learning by doing. that phrase, learning by doing, that you learn more when you can do it than you just hear about it. That's part of the reason you have science labs in the first place, to learn by doing. And the only way, I was asked this question by someone in Buffalo, New York, about that. And the question was slightly different. That question went, how can our public schools be like the Hizmet schools? And my answer to that, and I guess it's the only way I can answer you, is that most schools, public school systems, have professional days. There's usually a day set aside, normally usually it's the first day before the term begins, but it can be elsewhere, and it has been, where the day is set aside, there's no classes that day, and oftentimes experts are brought in to enhance the professional skills of the teachers. And I always thought one of the wonderful altruistic ways would be if someone from a Hizmet school could garner an invitation to one of these to kind of explain what we do. Not only does that is that only good PR, but it's also a way of bringing some of what exists within the culture. But again, you see, it's the pervasive culture of the thing. But you can't change culture is dynamic, it's not static. So cultures can be changed. Our cultures are always changing and evolving as we advance in technology, for example. So I would think that that's one way to do this, is to bring that expertise through some sort of training or shared workshop understanding into the public professional day. I don't think it's something you can put in a book. I don't think you put it in a book and you read it. I mean, you folks can hear me and kind of, and most of you are familiar with what I'm saying anyway, so you kind of know where I'm coming from. But for the outsider, totally lacking of knowledge of this, I don't think it's something you read. I really don't. I think what you do is you sit in on it. You go there. You do a visit. You watch not just a class, the day. Watch the full day. Watch the interactions. And then try to see how can I capture that magic? How can I bring that on? I think that's the only way, learning by doing.
Are there any other questions online or in the room?
There's a question online.
Thank you.
So the question is there a historical parallel to the Hizmet movement, one that was similarly targeted by politicians? What became of its followers and those politicians, and which past event does it closely resemble? Your answer could offer today's oppressed followers insight into what might lie ahead.
May I read that?
Yeah.
I got. All right, so in terms of there being any kind of historical parallels, I think there are many, but they're not necessarily exactly comparable in this sense. Every cultural or political revolution, its leaders always recognize the key to its success is in the educational system. So under the Nazis, control of the education and the youth camps, under the Soviet domination, under Castro, and if you go that route, you can see then that's an indoctrination of what goes on in the school system to channel a way of thinking and behaving. Communism, the group versus the individual concept there. If we look at religious movements, there are a great many religious sects and others that have, whether it be a yeshiva or whether it be a madrasa school or whatever, there are ways in which certain eternal truths to those believers can be promulgated and a behavior instituted. But in terms of, and there have been all kinds of movements, Ralph Waldo Emerson and the Transcendental Movement, or utopianism out of England, or there have been various kinds of movements that were flared for a while and ebbed but never disappeared. There's something different, I suspect, as I understand the Hizmet movement, partly because while on the one hand it has a faith underpinning, in the reality it is what I call lifestyle evangelism. That's really what it is, lifestyle evangelism. Living a good life as a good person with the thinking of the others, the altruistic living. And that is rather pervasive. And I think that can supersede any kind of political kind of technology or charismatic sect leader or whatever in that particular way. And so those kind of ebb and flow. And I think that's what, I think I'm covering that whole answer here of it, because sometimes it's political, sometimes it's religious, but Hizmet the Hizmet schools do not teach religion. Some of them may have a course in comparative religion, but they don't teach religion per se. And so it's not a religious movement, and you don't have to be a religious person to be a follower of the Hizmet movement, because that's not what it's about. It may have those underpinnings, but it's not religion per se. It's universal human values, which is what Mr. Gulen has been wanting to promote all along. And that, I think, can last far beyond us, as long as there are others that we have influenced to pass the torch themselves.
Any other questions?
Are we over time? Because I can tell a story.
No. We still have like 5-10 minutes left, but I was wondering, we have a lot of young people in the room. Would you have some advice for them? Like, maybe you could also link it with the book, but it's some.
Being the sage person giving some advice to younger people. I think I'll do it this way. I'm going to tell a parable. Okay. This will be my advice. There lived an old man in a village, and every day he would come out of his hut to escape the heat of the sun. And he sat under this big old shade tree. He sat there for two reasons. First, the tree provided the shade, the relief from the hot sun. And secondly, the tree was far older than he was. And so it gave him a perspective on life. But there were these two young men, two ne'er-do-wells, who were lazy, amounted to nothing. The village people thought so little of them. And for that reason, they despised the old man for his wisdom. They hated that every day, as he sat under the tree, the people of the village would gather around and seek his advice as counsel. They despised this, and they decided they would destroy him. But they couldn't figure out how to destroy him without making him a martyr. So they plotted and they schemed day after day, and finally they came up with it. And one said to the other, I know what we will do. I will capture a bird in my hand, and I'll bring it before the old fool in front of all of the people. And I'll ask him if the bird is alive or dead. And if he says it is dead, I will open my hand and let it fly away. And if he says it is alive, I will crush it in my hand before I open it. Either way, he will be wrong. And the people will see we are smarter than he is. He doesn't know all the answers. It will be the beginning of the end for us, for him, and the beginning of the rise of our power. And so the very next day, this very event occurs. The old man is under the tree. The people have gathered around, and so have the two of them one with the bird in his hand. And he stood before the old man, and he said, "Old man, if you are so wise, is the bird I hold in my hand alive or dead?" And the people gasped. They were astounded. They were also angry. How dared he be so impudent to their beloved wise old man? And the old man looked into the eye of his questioner. And he paused for just a moment. And then he answered. And this is what he said: "It is as you wish." Think how wise that answer is. A moment ago, no matter what he said, he would be wrong. No matter what they do now, he will be right. And so, what is my advice? I'm almost done here. You'll soon be rid of me. You will go about your lives. You will pursue your dreams. You will follow your instincts. You will perhaps be altruistic and follow those universal values. And I hope you will. But I don't know if you will. I only know one thing. It is as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you so much.